Hello, welcome to UDOT University, also known as UDOT-U. This is Risk 101, the basics of risk management. My name's Fred Daring. I am the Deputy Pre-Construction Engineer for the state. I've been charged with implementing a risk management strategy through the department. I like to say developing a culture of risk awareness. Here's my contact information on the screen. If you have any questions about anything you see today, please don't hesitate to give me a shout. So as I said, this is Risk 101, our introduction to risk. This is the first in a series of classes, and we hope to be turning out a new video every 3 to 4 weeks or so for the foreseeable future. So like any good class, we do have some objectives, things we're trying to teach in this class. By the end of the class, you ought to be able to define risk as we at UDOT define it, and to be able to know the difference between a threat and an opportunity, and to be able to identify the components of a risk register and how they're used throughout a risk workshop or a risk management. So, a little bit of course outline here. First we're going to touch on some basic definitions. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of risk management. And then we're going to talk about the development of a risk registry. And that includes the points you see down below. And we'll cover all of these in varying levels of detail for now. So, risk management at UDOT. Right now the department requires that all projects implement some form of risk management. Everything from the simplest Orange Book or procurement project all the way to the mega projects. And in class 102 we're going to talk about how to choose which form of risk management to use on which projects. The type of risk assessment depends on the size and complexity of the project. So why are we doing risk management on all these projects? Why is the department willing to put so much effort into developing risk registries and managing the risk on all of their projects? Well, I found this nice little quote on the web, and I completely agree with it, especially this first sentence here. Assessing and managing risks is the best weapon you have against project catastrophes. And I think intuitively, if you look back at the projects you've been involved in, you'll agree that the mundane, the everyday things aren't what cause us problems. It's the unexpected incidents that cause delay or overruns on our projects. And so risk management is a way of attempting to identify those and develop a strategy to address them before they happen so that we can be prepared for them. So what is risk? We're talking a lot about risk. Let's define it here. Got a couple of definitions. Caltrans, in their risk management handbook, says risk is an uncertainty that matters. It can affect project objectives negatively or positively. And likewise, on the web, that same website, they state risk management is the process of identifying, analyzing, and responding to risk factors throughout the life of a project and in the best interests of its objectives. Proper risk management implies control of possible future events and is proactive rather than reactive. And that's the key right there. We're proactively identifying these risks and attempting to avoid them or encourage them, depending on if they're a threat or an opportunity, rather than letting them happen and reacting to them. So, as I alluded to just a second ago, there are two kinds of risks, really. Well, yes. Threats are risks that negatively impact a project objective, while opportunities are risks that positively impact a project objective. So threats are bad, opportunities are good. And the focus of risk management is to identify both threats and opportunities, attempt to avoid the threats, and encourage the opportunities. So here at UDOT we've got different types of risk management, and let's go over those real briefly. So we've got what I call traditional risk management. This includes things like OSHA, workplace safety, claims, that type of thing. And this is something that UDOT's been dealing with for forever, many, many years. And we have an entire office assigned to do that. That's our risk management office with Tim Rodriguez and his staff down there. They do a great job of managing those risks, and that's not what we're focusing on today. Then there are programmatic risks, risks that affect things like funding level, the actions of the legislature and how they impact us, our project delivery, the reputation of the department. That's a great risk factor. And once again, we've already got people assigned to manage those risks. We've got our legislative liaison, Linda Toy Hull, who does a great job dealing with some of those top levels there. The communications office is very sensitive about our reputation and tries to manage that risk as well. And then we've got program managers who really are involved throughout all of these programmatic risks. And once again, these are not the types of risks that we're talking about in this video here today. Today we are talking about project level risks. These include the usual suspects: scope, schedule, budget, and quality. We're trying to identify factors on a project that could impact any of these four areas. Okay. Who's responsible to manage this? Well, right now it's the project managers and their team members. So every project that's assigned to a project manager also has a team of people assigned to it that are responsible to do the actual delivery of the project. And that group of people is key in identifying and managing the risks on projects. So, how do we account for risk? Risk isn't anything new. We've always had risk on projects. Well, traditionally, projects have accounted for risk by padding unit costs and quantities, and by including line items for a contingency. So, for example, if asphalt is priced currently going for $72 a ton, let's say, maybe in our estimates we're going to say, let's call it 75 just to be safe in case their price goes up in the meanwhile. So that's what I mean by padding. And then contingency items. We always put a line item at the bottom of our estimate for contingencies. And in fact, the department recommends a percentage level depending on the phase of project development. And that can be anywhere from 25% to 10% of the total project cost is reserved for risks, for the contingency. And that really is an inefficient use of department money, of project money. If we're holding that money back on a project that really doesn't have that big risks associated with it, that money could have been put to beneficial use elsewhere instead of holding on to it in contingency. So when we use risk management, at least the higher level of risk management, all of the padding and contingency are removed from the estimate. We develop a very pure estimate based on exactly what we expect it to cost today, and then we develop a new contingency that's based on the value of the risks identified with their probability of occurrence. So for the asphalt example, if asphalt is in fact $72 a ton today and we're putting together an estimate, we would estimate the project with $72 a ton. And then we might identify a risk factor that asphalt prices go up. And we would come up with, using the best knowledge of the people in the room, what's the probability of that happening and what's the range of possible costs for asphalt when we deliver the project. And then we can make a smart decision about how much money to hold in reserve to cover that potential cost increase. Okay? And that the amount that we're holding in risk may be higher or lower than the traditional percentage. And that's important too, because if there are far more risks to a project than the traditional contingency would have handled, then you're going to wind up being short on money at the end. So better to know that going in, that we have a potential for a very high amount of contingency need on a project. And then the lower is what we just talked about. If we really don't have much risk on a project, holding a large amount of contingency is a waste of money, or at least the poor timing of the use of money. So this graph kind of shows how the difference between what we're attempting to do and what we've traditionally done. So this red line here represents traditional estimating. So at any point in time, we have a conservative estimate of what the project can cost. That's the padding that we talked about. Maybe we round up units, quantities. So if an item's going to cost, or we expect to have 25 of an item, 25 luminaires. Let's put in 30 in our estimate right now just to be safe. So this is a conservative estimate, and we have allowances for things that we don't know. So at a certain stage in project delivery, we may not know exactly how many traffic signals and the cost of each of those signal systems is going to be, but we put in a placeholder for that. And as the project development continues, we get better and better costs on that. Okay? And then on top of that, we throw a contingency. At concept, we're putting 25% on top of a project. You say, okay, these are to handle all the things that we don't know about yet. And that includes the unknown items that we haven't put an allowance for, and risk items. Okay? So traditionally, this is how we've been doing it. Our goal is to move to this graph in the background. And let me explain this graph a little bit. So this large blue item down here represents items that are known and quantifiable. We know how much earthwork we're going to have on this particular project because we've run the models. So we know that amount, and we've associated a certain dollar amount with that. The next area is the known but not quantified. So this is like the luminaires that I was talking about. We know we're going to have luminaires or whatever, but we don't know how many of those we're going to have. So we take our best guess and we put that number in here. Then there are the unrecognized costs, things we don't know about at any point in time. This could be items that we forgot about, that we didn't realize we were going to have, or they could be risk items. For example, soft subgrade. Now, as we're moving forward in design, we may not have a contingency set aside or an amount set aside for soft subgrade. It's just held in this contingency amount. Okay? As we progress through design and into construction, we're going to know better and better exactly how much we're going to need to cover those costs. So the key in risk management is to identify these two items, the known and quantifiable, the known but not quantified, and then to try to develop our best guess as to what these unrecognized costs are going to be. And then as we move through the project over time, we know more and more about the project. This dark blue area becomes larger, the green area gets squeezed, and the yellow area gets squeezed until we're at the very end. And when do we really know how much a project costs? At final closeout, right? When all the bills are paid. It may even be after that. It's when the last right-of-way condemnation is settled, which could be years after the fact, that we actually know how much that project cost. So what we're trying to do in risk management is project that. We're trying to take an educated guess at how much we're going to need at some point in the future. So, how does UDOT account for risk? Well, in the past, we've done project-level risk management on sort of an ad hoc basis. This really proved the value of risk management. This started about 12 years ago or so from now. This is 2015. Back during the legacy lawsuit was the first time we implemented a formal risk management process. And it was highly successful, really helped get that project off the ground. And we've used it several times since then, and as time goes by we're using it more and more, and it's really proven itself to be worth the effort. So recently, it's been almost 4 years ago now, they asked me to come over and formally set up a risk management program. So to do that, we established a central support person, that's me, developed tools, that's what I've been doing, and developed training, and that's what you're looking at right now. So trying to meet all of these things so that we can get the entire department on board and moving ahead with risk management. So the tools I've developed are based largely on tools that were developed by Washington State DOT. I've modified them. Some of them I've completely rewritten. But they fit very well with the way that we do business. And there are three basic levels of risk management that we'll really get into in Class 102. But for now, just so you know the terms, we've got the CVIP process, which stands for Cost Estimate Validation Process. This is a process that was developed by WashDOT. They've put a copyright, I guess, on the name CVIP. So we have to give them credit whenever we use that term, but we're free to use that method at any point in time. It is a very robust look at project risks and schedule risks. But it's also quite expensive and takes a lot of time to run through that process. It's really reserved for very large projects. Next up we have the CRA, or Cost Risk Analysis. Some people call this the Monte Carlo modeling. You'll see that in a minute. It's really just a simpler version of CVIP. It's typically done in-house with project staff. I can facilitate those meetings, or there are others who are learning how to facilitate those meetings. And it's typically 1 to 2.5 or 3 days worth of workshops, as opposed to a week plus for a CVIP workshop. Okay. It's not as robust as CVIP. It doesn't have the sophistication of the modeling, but it's a lot simpler and cheaper to run. Now, sometimes you'll hear the term CRAVE. CRAVE stands for Cost Risk Analysis with Value Engineering, and it's a way of combining risk management with value engineering. And basically what we do is we do either a CVIP or a CRA to identify the biggest risks to a project, and then we value engineer those risks. This does fulfill all the federal VE requirements. When you're using federal money and you've got an estimate of greater than $50 million on a project or $25 million on a bridge, you have to do a VE study if it's using federal dollars. Doing a CRAVE fulfills that requirement. And quite frankly, being in charge of both VE and risk, I like the CRAVE better than a pure VE, because it really focuses the efforts of that VE team onto those items that are really going to matter for that project. And once again, we'll talk about all these in more depth in Class 102. The final tool we have is UDOT's Qualitative Risk Worksheet. And this is a very simple spreadsheet that I put together, and as the name implies, it's qualitative. It does not calculate an actual value of each risk. Both the CVIP and the CRA assign a dollar value to any given risk. The qualitative spreadsheet simply says this risk is greater than that risk, or that risk is less than that risk. And it allows you to kind of compare them qualitatively so you know where to focus your efforts. And this is something that takes a day or less to run. The real focus of these first series of training classes is going to be teaching you how you can run that model so that a project manager, design leader can sit down with their project team and work through this worksheet and get some useful results out of it. In the meanwhile, once again, I'm happy to come and help your project team work through it. But the end goal here is for me to work myself out of a job and for you guys to be able to take over the running of this model. Okay. So, all of the tools we just talked about require a baseline estimate and schedule. The the detail of both of those items varies greatly with the level of risk management you're going to do. And obviously the qualitative spreadsheet requires far less granular data than a full-blown CVIP, and we'll talk about those requirements in the future. All of the tools also depend upon developing a risk registry to keep track of the risks and to help prioritize them. And we're going to talk about risk registries later in this class. Some of the tools, the CVIP and the CRA, both use what's called Monte Carlo method of calculations or simulation, Monte Carlo simulation, to generate the output. We'll talk about that in more depth in a later class as well. Okay, so this is a sample risk register, and I certainly don't expect you to read this, but you can see there's a fair amount of effort that goes into developing this register. And basically what we're doing is keeping track of the risks and trying to get a feel for the magnitude of the risks, both in terms of cost and schedule. And then we're developing a response strategy, how we're going to respond to that risk, and assigning responsibility for that follow-up. Okay. So how do we develop these risk registers? Traditionally they are done in a workshop setting. Okay. We identify them using a multidisciplinary team in a facilitated workshop. On a CVIP, we tend to bring in outside subject matter experts. On both the CRA and especially on the qualitative worksheet, we just use in-house staff to do that, unless and by in-house I also mean consultants who are working on the project. We will use their staff as well as actual UDOT employees. Okay. Occasionally we'll find the need to bring in an outside expert on a CRA type workshop, and we'll discuss that when the time comes for an actual workshop. We'll identify what we think the likely risks are and who can best help us address those risks and identify them. Okay. These risks workshops use something known as the Delphi method, named after the Oracle of Delphi. And in mythology, the Oracle of Delphi was a being that you could approach and you could ask him any question and he would be able to answer it for you. In this situation, what we're referring to is a method of trying to predict unknowables in the future. We really don't know with certainty what's going to happen at any point in the future, but we're trying to take our best guess as to what the range of outcomes could be. And many studies have shown that this Delphi method is as good or better than any other method of trying to predict the unknowable. And basically what it is you get a group of experts together and you ask this group that question, and then you cycle through their debating, asking questions of each other, arguing with each other, disagreeing, agreeing, working together until they come up with what they can concur is an answer to the question. So by using the totality of the knowledge of everyone in the room, we bounce back and forth, we try to come up with a method or an answer that is acceptable to everyone in the workshop. And once again, this is proven as successful as any other method of trying to predict unknowable items. Okay? So once we've identified each of the risks, we then assign a probability of occurrence, how likely is it going to be that could happen, and what the cost and schedule impacts of its occurrence would be. And those can be expressed either as a single number or a range of potential impacts. It depends on the method and what we're trying to accomplish. Okay? And once again, risks can either be negative threats or opportunities, which are positive. So at this point, we're going to go into the actual risk registry, and I'm going to show you how to develop that.